BBC Northwest Studio and Transmission Facilities from 30 Odd Years Ago by Joseph P. Campbell. Disclaimer. This PDF and Microsoft PowerPoint presentation work on BBC Northwest and BBC North is in no way endorsed by the British Broadcasting Corporation, either locally, regionally or nationally. The facts expressed in this document originate from the author's experience of being shown around various BBC Northwest premises, on college visits, etc. He's also incorporated some of his knowledge gained from unpaid training attachments and visits to a related BBC region during the early to mid-1990s. Contents. Number 1. BBC Northwest's radio and television editorial coverage area by autumn 1987. Number 2. Local radio studio facilities, radios Cumbria, GMR, Lancashire and Radio Merseyside. Number 3. New Broadcasting House television news facilities. Number 4. BBC Northwest main television transmitter at Winter Hill. Number 5. National radio facilities. Number 6. The transition from BBC Northwest into BBC North. Number 7. The BBC North Night Network stations. Number 8. Synopsis. Number 9. References. And finally number 10. About the author. Number 1. The BBC Northwest radio and television editorial coverage area by autumn 1987. The BBC is shaping up. The BBC Northwest region, in literal geographical form as it was defined by autumn 1987, is shown in Figure 1. It extended south as far as the Crewe area of Cheshire, as far east as Oldham, and as far north as Carlisle. By this period, the region had been assigned an additional main UHF TV transmitter site, this being located at Colbeck. Prior to late 87, the Colbeck TV transmitter took its BBC regional programme feed from BBC North East, based at Broadcasting Centre within Newcastle upon Tyne, in order to screen Look North originating from there. With the cooperation of BT plc's network switching centres, the BBC's Colbeck transmitter's sound and vision circuit feed regional opt-out system was reconfigured in order to allow a permanent arrangement for New Broadcasting House in Manchester, so that the weekday transmissions of Northwest Tonight and the morning, afternoon and evening transmissions of BBC News Northwest Cumbria, which originated from Radio Cumbria's former studio complex in Carlisle, could be transmitted from the site at issue.
BBC Local Radio Northwest.
2. Local radio studio facilities, radios Cumbria, BBC GMR, Radio Lancashire and Radio Merseyside. Local radio studio centres, BBC Radio Cumbria, GMR, Lancashire and Merseyside. Hilltop Heights for Radio Cumbria, New Broadcasting House for GMR, Paradise Street for Radio Merseyside, and Blackburn with Darwen for Radio Lancashire. BBC GMR was formerly known as BBC Radio Manchester until late 1988. However, by 2005 the station had reverted back to its original name. The station's original identity is shown below. The image in photo 1 shows a monophonic version of a Euroreport quarter-inch open-reel tape recorder, standard broadcast radio reporter open-reel recorder issue. Photo 2 shows a Ewer in its optional leather case with optional Ewer manufactured microphone. By the late 1980s, such radio reporters often used Marantz CP430 3-head cassette recorders pictured in photo 3 and Sony professional Walkman cassette machines, and with the use of high coercivity cassettes, e.g. metal position and chromium dioxide compact cassette tapes for optimal audio quality, shown next in photo 4. Because of the advances made in the development of noise reduction techniques for high-end portable cassette recorders, e.g. the Dolby Laboratories DBX system, and improvements in the engineering of later models, not all of them using DBX, it was possible by the mid-1980s for BBC local and national radio stations to acquire a range of machines which produced first-generation recordings of BBC standard broadcast quality when used with high cohesivity tape standards, and which were many times less expensive than the usually used quarter-inch tape format open reel machines. The Marantz CP430 was an example of such a cassette recorder. It's pictured above in photo 3. A Euroreport monophonic machine would have cost the BBC on average about £900 as they purchased a relatively large number per year. In contrast, a Marantz CP430 machine would have cost the BBC approximately £340. For stereo versions, the BBC would have been expected to pay approximately £1,200 for each machine. A private sound recorders would have expected to have paid around £1,600 including VAT in the late 1980s for a Euroreport with stereo recording capability. The Euroreport stereo versions were used for recording operations that normally required more creativity than needed for local news reporting, e.g. location drama production recording. The production of drama made up a very small amount of the total yearly outside broadcast time of Radio Merseyside. In BBC local radio, the Marantz CP430 and Sony Walkman professional cassette recorders, despite being of stereo recording capability, were usually only used in local radio news and current affairs operations, i.e. by their radio reporters who, in the process of producing a radio report, would have gone out and about within their editorial area in order to interview a relevant person or group of people. The Bayer Dynamic M201 and AKG D202 microphones were usually used with the CP430 and professional Walkman cassette machines. See next slide. Figure 14 on the next slide shows an AKG D202 pressure gradient microphone, whilst figure 15 on the next slide shows an AKG C414 switchable polar response microphone, i.e. a microphone that has a choice of directional characteristics that can be switched by the program or technical assistant on duty here to a choice of 5 different polar responses, these being omnidirectional, cardioid, supercardioid, hypercardioid and figure of 8, i.e. bidirectional directivity. Meanwhile, figure 16 shows a Rycott basket windshield with hand grip and one covered with a Rycott fleece wind jammer. The use of a wind jammer led to a greater number of decibels of wind noise reduction when used with associated basket windshield. These accessories were usually used with the Sennheiser MKH 416 shotgun microphone. The microphone at issue fitting into the basket windshield where it was mounted on 2 plastic holders which gripped the casing of the mic at points towards each end of the interference tube in which the actual transducer capsules were contained. Some of the typical microphones and accessories used within BBC local radio operations, both in studio and at outside broadcast locations. AKG C414, AKG D202, basket windshield with Rycott windjammer. Photo 5 shows an AKG D202 microphone. Photo 6 shows an AKG C414 microphone. And finally, photo 7 shows a Rycott windjammer with a basket windshield used for shotgun microphones and other microphones that could fit into the basket windshield. Photo 8 shows a Bayer Dynamic M201 microphone. A dynamic instrument uses a moving coil attached to the microphone's diaphragm. When sound waves of sufficient amplitude, proportional to the sound pressure level, impinge on the instrument at issue's diaphragm, the coil of wire attached to the diaphragm moves in harmony with it and within a permanent magnet's magnetic field. The amplitude and frequency of the induced electrical current within the coil of wire is analogous to the amplitude and frequency of the sound waves being sensed by the dynamic microphone concerned. Note, the amplitude of the current induced in the coil concerned is dependent on Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction. That's physics laws. Photo 9 shows a Sennheiser MKH 416 gun microphone, interference tube microphone. This instrument was a lot more directional than M201 microphone and was usually used in the context of BBC local radio in outside broadcasting and/or outside recording, I should say, and/or OB situations where this microphone was mounted in a Rycock basket windshield already shown. For indoor recording OB activities, it was used with a foam windshield. This would prevent low-frequency noise, that's rumble, that was caused by drafts within a building from marring in a recording OB, etc. This microphone was a form of capacitor microphone. Capacitor instruments are more sensitive than dynamic ones, but more expensive in the context of broadcast sound quality applications. The MKH-816 long gun microphone could also be used in activities requiring a lower polar response, i.e. a highly directional sensitivity pattern. Additional MKH-816s were usually temporarily obtained from the relevant audio stores department within New Broadcasting House in Manchester, e.g. in the case of a large OB recording activity. The table shown in Figure 2. The table shown in Figure 2 lists the 3 recommended TDK cassette type tapes for each of the 3 possible tape bias settings. BBC staff trained to use Marantz CP430 cassette recorders were ordered to use metal formulation, TDK-MA or TDK-MAR cassettes wherever possible. The second choice being chromium dioxide formulation TDK-SA cassettes. For broadcast audio use, staff were told never to use the ferric tape formulation as it didn't offer a high enough value of signal to noise ratio, even using the DBX noise reduction system. This was because IEC Type 1 tape couldn't accept the high signal levels that IEC Type 3 and Type 2 tape formulations could accept without a distorted sound recording being made. Thus, the Type 3 metal formulation possessed a higher coercivity value than that offered by Type 2 chromium dioxide tape formulation. Because metal formulation cassette tape possessed the highest value of coercivity of the 3 tape types under discussion, it was usually the choice of the radio reporters who usually used the CP430's Type 3 tape allowed, subject to setting the CP430 to its optimal recording level. And switching in the DBX noise reduction system shown in Figure 3, on record and playback, the optimal signal to noise ratio and lowest distortion levels to be obtained, and so be in keeping with the BBC's high technical standards for recording destined for radio transmission. Figure 4 shows the left VU meter of the CP430 cassette recorder, which also acted as a battery check indicator for the use of both rechargeable and non-rechargeable batteries. Local radio reporters usually use rechargeable batteries cells and charge them up in the engineering charge workshop office or an anti-room office where such recharging facilities were installed. I'll now take an individual overlook of the then 4 BBC North West local radio stations, studio and transmission facilities in alphabetical order, starting first with Radio Cumbria.
Radio Cumbria.
Photo 10 shows Radio Cumbria's former studio centre, whilst Figure 5 shows its former addresses. The station's main studio centre was located on the 3rd floor of the Hilltop Heights building in the city of Carlisle, Cumbria. This floor housed most of the radio station's permanent radio broadcasting studios, together with a robotically operated one-camera news and current affairs television studio for BBC North West, which also had technical provision to opt out of the Colbeck UHF television transmitter for News North West Cumbria bulletins. A further 2 additional presenter-operated studios and 1 NCA radio studio were located in Barrow-in-Furness and had a facility to opt out of Radio Cumbria's transmissions from 4 of their radio transmitters, these being Barrow on 837 kHz, Kendal on 95.2 MHz VHF FM, Morecambe Bay on 96.1 MHz VHF FM, and Windermere on 104.2 MHz VHF FM. Radio Cumbria's official coverage area for the station's MF and VHF FM Band 2 stereo transmitter sites is shown in Figure 6. Because of the hilly terrain within the Cumbria area, which causes a screening effect, particularly in the case of VHF radio wave propagation, Radio Cumbria needed a total of 4 VHF FM transmitter sites and 3 MF sites. The hilly and green nature of Radio Cumbria's terrain is abstractly represented in the station's 1980s to late 1990s visual identity stroke insignia. The term medium wave is used when medium frequency is expressed in wavelength terms. This is in the top left-hand corner of this slide's image, the visual identity and insignia of Radio Cumbria in the late 80s. Figure 7 shows a BBC Engineering Information coverage map, specifically showing the VHF Band 2 coverage area for Radio Cumbria's Morecambe Bay transmitter. This transmitter site had its own dedicated coverage map because it also transmitted the BBC national radio services of radios 1 to 4. Radio Cumbria service used a different VHF aerial system to those of the BBC's national VHF radio stations. For national services, an electrical component known as a combining unit was used to accept an input from the 5 radio transmitter RF power output stages concerned in order to provide an output to a common VHF aerial system without any damage being caused to any of the transmitter output stages. The Radio Furnace opt-out service of Radio Cumbria also used this transmitter site in addition to the 3 others already mentioned previously. Photo 11. Another view of a typical BBC local radio sound mixing desk of the mid to late 1980s is in use by one of the station's presenters. There are some limited use of personal computer software within this presenter-operated studio, evidence of which can be seen in the background of photo 11 in the form of a green monochrome text-only visual display unit. This was used to display telephone call contributor information and any other information that the presenter's producer may have wanted to convey to the presenter during, say, a live phone-in, etc., in addition to addressing him over his headphones. This system being known as talkback. Note the stack of Sonifex quarter-inch tape cartridges sitting on top of the mixing desk. These contained recorded musical station identification jingles and presenter name shirts together with in-house radio station programme advertisements for forthcoming Radio Cumbria programmes. These Sonifex cartridges and associated cart machines were identical to those used in the hourly news bulletin studio area featured next. Therefore, when the presenter seen in figure 12 had opened an appropriate linear fader control fully or only partially, one of his studio cart machines would trigger and play a jingle, program ad or promotion. After playout, the cartridge concerned would automatically rewind to a predetermined cue point so that the recorded material concerned could be aired again, either during the original program or by a presenter of a later program from the same studio that day. Unless there was a technical fault or some other unplanned adverse occurrence, the program that followed was originated from another studio, i.e. there wasn't usually a hot seat changeover by the following presenter. The procedure for putting the next studio into circuit for the preceding program with Radio Cumbria's transmitters was simple to implement. There was a couple of procedures available in order to achieve this. One was the following presenter would check the signal level coming into their desk on the pre-fade listen facility so that it was of the right amplitude to fade up or switch in. The presenter's sound mixing desk operated on an XOR logical function with the preceding studio.
Thousands of holidaymakers are facing long delays at airports around the country because of industrial action by air traffic control engineers in France.
The news desk, Bert Houston, with the very hot weather that's around at the moment, has taken to wearing his kilt 4 inches above the knee.
Radio Cumbria.
Not a pretty sight.
In colour. The country sound.
Radio Cumbria, BBC Radio Cumbria's former hourly news bulletin desk with newscaster Bert Houston seated is shown in photo 12. Note the Sonifex quarter-inch tape cartridge machine comprising 3 actual cartridge players. After the newscaster had pressed the play button and a news report audio insert had been played out, the tape cartridge concerned would automatically rewind to the beginning so that it was ready for play out on the next hourly newscast. No time was wasted, therefore, manually rewinding the cartridges at issue after each bulletin had been transmitted. Radio broadcast reporters would usually have recorded their news reports on newer quarter-inch tape machines, editing the tape using a razor blade and chinograph pencil, and sometimes also tape-to-tape techniques, and then dubbing the finished report onto a quarter-inch cartridge. Sound effects machines provided a record mode facility, and it was the same for cassette tapes, which were recorded on Marantz CP430 and Sony Professional Walkman. They'd be dubbed onto quarter-inch tape for editing with a razor blade and chinograph pencil. Late 1980s bi-media news working policy within Radio Cumbria, its News Northwest Cumbria television studio facility. The remotely operated one-camera news and current affairs television studio within Radio Cumbria's former premises is shown in photo 13. The studio background, made of a combination of chipboard and other form of wood and plastic, together with the removable laminated cardboard News Northwest Cumbria sign, is shown in photo 13. The cardboard sign was removable because of the fact that BBC Network news programmes, and indeed other regions' news programme producers, could book the use of this TV studio facility. It wouldn't have been appropriate for their viewers to see Radio Cumbria's Colbeck opt-out news service's identity. A labelled photograph showing most of the technical facilities of this TV studio is shown next in photo 14. Photo 14. Casing containing the robotics for the remotely operated TV camera, together with the red adhesive warning sticker in order to warn studio personnel that the camera may move at any time. A BBC health and safety requirement concerning remotely operated broadcast camera installations. Its colour TV tube camera with the AutoCue monochrome CRT screen folded up above it was not in use at the time of visit. It is shown in photo 15 as the first discernible object from the left. The AutoCue screen was fed with a negative video CCTV signal from the monochrome camera positioned 90 degrees downwards from the horizontal in order to view typed text on a roll of paper and moving with the aid of an electric motor under this black and white camera focused down on it. This CCTV signal, now in mirror image form, was then fed to the screen beneath the broadcast TV camera's lens's transparent glass plate on the front of it, in order that the white text on a black background was reflected from this glass plate, which could be read by the on-duty TV newscaster looking directly at the broadcast camera. The use of an AutoCue system meant that the newscaster didn't have to look periodically downwards at their script, which would have looked unprofessional to the viewers at home. The reason why viewers couldn't see the white-coloured AutoCue text that the newscaster was reading was because of the angle of the glass plate reflector in relation to the broadcast TV camera's lens system and image pickup tube. The laws of physics as they apply to the reflection of light dictate that because of the angle of incidence of light reflected from the AutoCue CRT screen of the glass plate already mentioned, none of the white light emitted from this screen was detected by the broadcast TV camera's image pickup tube. It's interesting to note that AutoCue and its competitor AutoScript are still in use, but in modern form, and involve the use of computer software to generate the type text that will be sent straight to the now flat screen monitor positioned beneath the TV studio. CCD cameras now in use in news and current affairs settings and other areas of broadcast TV production. The motor-drawn, typed-out paper roll is now dispensed with. Another competing system to AutoCue and AutoScript is the Microsoft Corporation's WinCue software application. The broadcast remotely operated PAL 625-line colour TV camera could be turned in the horizontal and vertical plane by servo motors constituting part of a robotic system usually operated by a regional technical operator and the senior vision supervisor within the Central Technical Area Review Broadcasting House in Manchester when it was used for live contributions into the regional news magazine North West Tonight. The command signals used to move this remotely operated camera were in digital form and were transmitted to Radio Cumbria's robotically controlled TV camera using a dial-up connection that involved the use of a low data rate modem attached to a rented PSTN subscriber line. There was also a reserved PSTN subscriber line and associated subscriber number that was made available to relevant BBC staff already commented on. A miniaturised joystick installed on a vision and sound circuit switching console within New Broadcasting House's CTA could be used to move the TV camera at issue. There was also a miniature plastic joystick, black in colour controller for the TV camera concerned within the Radio Cumbria-based TV studio itself, this usually being used by the opt-out Cumbria newscaster. Next to it was a television monitor. This was used by an on-duty opt-out newscaster to view the vision output to the transmitter that originated from their studio. A wood veneered loudspeaker was positioned a few centimetres away. However, because of the technical problems that would have been experienced if it had been used to monitor live audio originating from the studio during a News North West Cumbria bulletin, even using one of the table-mounted hypercardioid directional microphones in the studio at the time, and taking into account sound reflection damping measures in the form of the white perforated boxes filled with fiberglass wool on the studio wall behind the remotely operated camera, a low level of sound pickup from the rear of the table-mounted microphone would have been experienced within the small confines of this studio, as there would still be a direct path for sound waves from the loudspeaker arriving at the instrument mentioned, and other sound waves arriving at approximately 90 degrees to the tie-clip microphone worn by the on-duty newscaster at issue. This would have manifested itself as a whistle or howl, being present not only on the studio's loudspeaker but also on the viewer's television sound speaker output in their own homes, this effect being known as regenerative feedback. The regenerative feedback phenomenon can also be known as positive feedback. To avoid this regenerative feedback problem but provide the facility to listen to audio signals at a comfortable level, the on-duty newscaster would wear an earphone, known in TV broadcasting parlance as an earpiece. This would provide many tens of decibels of sound wave isolation between the two studio microphones usually in use and the earpiece worn by the newscaster, thus avoiding the effect on the audio output concerned. As has been said, in the case of Radio Cumbria's one-camera TV studio, it had an opt-out facility for viewers served by the Colbeck UHF band for high-power transmitter independent relays, which served the Cumbria area of the region at issue. Next, I'll give some significant level of technical explanation concerning the process of the station's one-camera studio making the Colbeck UHF transmitter independent relays serving the population of Cumbria with the BBC television services of the day opt out from the television centre's Network 1 output from London. Network 1 is the term used to describe the BBC One signal originating from Television Centre in London before it's radiated by the UHF transmitter network that was used by the BBC when it was originated from Television Centre. One-camera remotely operated TV studios are based at most of the BBC local radio stations within a given region. However, other than Radio Cumbria's one-camera studio, most other BBC TV studios based within local radio studio buildings didn't have a main UHF transmitter opt-out facility. This was usually because of a given main TV transmitter's coverage area not lying within a boundary where it would be logical to have a one-camera studio opt-out TV news service, in addition to the main regional opt-out from the BBC One TV network. network. Additionally, some BBC TV regions only had one main UHF transmitter and associated dependent relays, so there was no way in which the regional news output could be split into two opt-out areas, i.e. sub-regions, unless there was technical provision to opt out from an appropriate relay transmitter and assuming the relay outage served a recognised culturally different area within a given BBC region. Photo 16 shows the former Carlbeck high-power UHF Band 4 steel lattice broadcasting mast, photographed in August 1988, shortly after a major aerial overhaul. The Carlbeck mast, together with its dependent relay, served the population of Cumbria with UHF power terrestrial television. The UHF transmission aerial system was located within the white glass reinforced plastic cylinder position at the top of the mast. In the late 1980s, it radiated BBC North West and News North West Cumbria on Channel 30, BBC 2 North West on Channel 34, ITV Border Television on Channel 28 and Channel 4 on Channel 32. Radio Cumbria's News North West Cumbria opt-out TV news service therefore carried on Channel 30, and additionally there was technical provision for the station's TV studio to opt out on Channel 34 from this mast, which usually carried BBC 2 North West via New Broadcasting House in Manchester. The mast was dismantled in the late 2000s after a taller and stronger mast of the same type was built in the vicinity of it. The new aerial support structure radiates digital terrestrial television on different UHF channel numbers to that of the former analogue ones. The Carlbeck transmitter had its analogue UHF PAL TV service switched off in 2008. End of late 1980s bi-media news working policy within Radio Cumbria's feature.
In tune with the Northwest, GMR. More news, more sports. 95.1 GMR.
Hello, my name's Joe Campbell, your new presenter here on GMR for the next 2 minutes.
GMR weather.
There will be occasional showers with less wind this afternoon. Temperatures may reach 7 Celsius 45 Fahrenheit in places. In all parts, though, the showers will fall as snow on the higher ground and may become wintry at lower levels during this evening. Well, have you ever wondered what it's like to have a go on the Krypton Factor assault course? You know the sort of thing, climbing over obstacles, scrambling under nets, jumping over muddy water. Sounds like a piece of cake, doesn't it? Well, if you'd like to have a go and help raise some money for charity, at the same time we'll be telling you how very shortly. Finally, after 11 o'clock, we'll be continuing our look at alternative therapies and how they can affect our lives, and today we'll be finding out what Gestalt therapy has to offer, if I've pronounced it right. The mind boggles. All this plus the stinker competition, your requests and dedication. Call us on 061 228 2255.
GMR 95.1. In tune with you, BBC GMR.
A BT-approved telephony PBX switchboard with line hunting for queuing callers to a given on-air or recorded programme. This design possessed illuminated red-coloured LED indicators, these indicating which lines callers were waiting on. A stack of yellow buttons for the selection of any one of a number of incoming audio feeds carried via the BT PLC audio circuit distribution system, e.g. originating from the BBC's National Radio Network studios, based then at Broadcasting House in London, New Broadcasting House itself and other regional broadcasting centres that also constituted network production centres, or in order to relay a programme share from another BBC North West local radio station studio centre. Sound mixing console dynamics control areas, i.e. tone controls, pre-fade switches and pot audio level controls are also seen here. The pots are used for setting the maximum audio level that can be output from the log linear fader when fully open, to which the fader is assigned to. These studio cue lights, green coloured on the left hand side, meaning the studio's off air, a yellow coloured centre light, meaning prepare for transmission, and a red coloured light on the right hand side, meaning on air, i.e. transmission, or simply that the presenter's microphone fader control is open. The cue light system could be configured either way. Studio's clock, this displaying GMT or BST depending on relevant season. 3 Sonifex tape cartridges, quarter-inch tape cartridges, cart machines for originating recorded jingles, presenter name shouts and in-house program promotions. Each cart machine player could be triggered by the full or partial opening of the relevant fader control assigned to the cart machine at issue. The top cart machine is seen with the cartridge already loaded in. Presenter's microphone, Biodynamic M201 with foam pop filter installed and an adjustable boom. Left right, left minus right, right minus left and left plus right, PPMs, peak program meters, transmission audio level metering. These two red coloured linear fader controls were the master left and right audio level controls for the stereo mixing console's output at the central to the central apparatus room of GMR. These white coloured log linear fader controls were for the various audio source inputs, e.g. the presenter's microphone, in-studio contributors' microphones, the 3 Sonifex cart machines, 2 vinyl grams, 2 CD players and sound circuit inputs from the BT PLC audio circuit contribution network. Built-in loudspeaker, talkback microphone controls for presenter communication to a distant contributors, studio technical assistant and or radio car OB location staff.
More news in the morning. BBC GMR.
GMR News. GMR News from the BBC.
At 1 o'clock, Mike Ford reporting. The headlines this lunchtime. British Rail offers a reward of £10,000 to help find the vandals who caused the derailment of a London express. And a rock star appears in court on drugs charges. Good afternoon. Now the news in detail.
Shown in photo 19 was New Broadcasting House's bi-media newsroom that was shared between the North West Tonight regional news magazine staff and those of BBC GMR's. The newsroom was refurbished in the summer of 1987 together with the installation of state-of-the-art BASES newsroom computer system, and they can now use a Microsoft Windows operating system. This was in time for the official implementation of the BBC's bi-media news working policy from the autumn of 1987.
In tune with you, BBC GMR.
Photo 20 shows the audio circuit patch panel within GMR's community studio at New Broadcasting House. The purpose of this apparatus was to allow manual routing of outgoing audio sources, for example microphones and contribution sound circuits, via the central apparatus room from within and outside NBH to the community studio sound mixing desk. This patch panel also provided incoming sound sources, for example, for contributors' headphones while they were seated in the community studio area under consideration. Near the bottom of the photo 20's image, you'll also see 2 small peak program meters built into rack-mounted level limiting circuit enclosures. These sound level meters could be assigned to incoming or outgoing studio sources. Peak program meters of this small size are permissible in the context of the BBC developed PPM audio level metering standard developed to measure transmitted program audio levels. BBC GMR's transmitter locations and technical details were as follows. Home Moss on 95.1 MHz, mixed polarisation and an ERP of 5.6 kilowatts. Saddleworth on 104.6 MHz, vertically polarised and an ERP of 100 watts. The station had a medium wave site that radiated an amplitude modulated signal on 1458 kHz. ERP is an abbreviation for effective radiated power.
At home or on your way with the BBC Radio Lancashire.
Radio Lancashire started life as a station known as BBC Radio Blackburn. In addition to its main Blackburn studio centre, it had NCA studios in Darwin and Preston. The Preston studio base also accommodating one of the remotely operated one-camera news and current affairs studios, whose type was featured in the Radio Cumbria write-up of this presentation. The presentation news and current affairs TV studio was usually used for remotely interviewing people for live or recorded insertion into BBC North West Tonight regional news and current affairs programme, but like the Radio Cumbria TV studio, could be used by other BBC regions, ITN and ITV regional news programmes. This arrangement would be dependent on the relevant BT PLC's network switching centres swinging into action by a TTO pressing a few keys on a keyboard. Shown in photo 21 is a Radio Lancashire British Lane and Maestro reporter's vehicle, with a reporter crouched next to it and interviewing a child with a Euro Report and Euro issue microphone. BBC Radio Lancashire's transmitted locations and technical details were as follows. Hamilton Hill on 95.5 MHz, mixed polarisation and radiating 1.6 kilowatts. Lancaster on 104.5 MHz, mixed polarisation and radiating 2 kilowatt ERP. Winter Hill 103.9 MHz, mixed polarisation and radiating 2 kilowatts ERP. Oxcliffe on 1557 kHz, vertically polarised and radiating 250 watts. EMRP, which is an abbreviation for effective monopole radiated power. Preston radiated on 855 kHz, vertically polarised with an output power of 1 kilowatt EMRP.
This is Radio Merseyside. This is BBC Radio Merseyside on 1485 kHz, that's 202 metres medium wave, and in stereo on 95.8 FM VHF. Our address is Radio Merseyside, 55 Paradise Street, Liverpool, L1 3BP. Radio Merseyside.
Figure 8. A November 1985 Radio Merseyside 18th Birthday Magazine article by the then engineer-in-charge Bill Holt. Bill Holt wrote in an entertaining way what the engineer-in-charge and the other engineers and staff do at Radio Merseyside behind the scenes. Photo 22 shows two vinyl discograms, also known as record decks, within one of the station's presenter-operated on-air studios. Photo 23 shows once again a typical presenter-operated sound mixing desk in the same studio. Furthest from the grams is an early design of DTMF, that's dual-tone multi-frequency telephone and associated telephone PBX. That's a private branch exchange switchboard that's being used to queue prospective telephone contributors to current affairs programmes with a phone-in feature, and also for quiz features within live light entertainment productions. The in-studio telephone PBX facilities were also used for recorded radio programme productions, whilst the studio at issue was in an off-air mode. In order to interface an analog 2-wire telephone subscriber line, the desk at issue needed to have within it a hybrid transformer and associated electronics in order to present the correct impedance match and therefore electrical voltage levels to the appropriate audio fader control circuits within the desk. It also ensured that BT plc's telephone exchange equipment was electrically safe from transmission line, signal reflections and overcurrent damage, etc. PBX is an abbreviation for Private Branch Exchange. Photo 24 shows an image of part of the multi-contributor on-air studio within their former 55 Paradise Street studio complex. It was multi-contributor on the grounds that there was a round-shaped table set up on the studio's floor space with an AKG switchable polar response pattern microphone already featured, mounted in the centre of it, in order to allow for the pickup of sound from 2 or more contributors. For 2 people contributing, the microphone was switched to a figure of 8, i.e. bidirectional polar response pattern. For more people contributing, the microphone's directional response was switched to omnidirectional. The use of this studio involved the use of at least one program assistant acting as a technical assistant who could have been a member or members of the station's off-duty presentation staff. A typical BBC local radio presenter being trained in program assistant / technical assistance in the context of local radio technical operations. Photo 25 shows a close-up image of the previously featured presenter-operated desk. The presenter's microphone is in view and attached to a jointed microphone boom so that its position can be adjusted in order to allow its use with presentation staff of differing seated heights. The microphone pictured is a biodynamic M201 with black foam pop filter attached. This microphone was widely used in BBC local radio settings. The purpose of the pop filter was to prevent plosive rumbling or booming sounds being heard on the air when a presenter spoke a word beginning with the letter P or breathed out quickly if in close proximity to the microphone. The 3 peak programming meters show the audio level leaving the desk on a 7-point scale. The left-hand side peak program meter displayed a level reading from the left minus right different stereo channel, whilst the ppm on the right-hand side displayed a reading from the right minus left difference channel. The middle ppm showed the left plus right, that's the sum signal reading, this being necessary in order to assess the monophonic audio level. This facility was needed because a large number of listeners used radio sets with only one loudspeaker. See photo 26 below. This form of level metering was developed by BBC research and development engineering staff many decades ago, as the typical VU metering standard was not of the necessary electrical characteristics required to monitor the relevant transients in modulation level in order that appropriate action by the presenter / program or technical assistant could be taken so as not to overmodulate the transmitters. Transmitters react differently to a given level of audio signal transient in comparison to, say, audio magnetic tape recorders, which usually use the VU metering standard, VU standing for volume unit. Shown opposite in photo 27 was Radio Merseyside's converted British Leyland Montego estate vehicle known as a radiocar. This vehicle was in use from late 1985 until 1990. The pneumatic telescopic tower supported a UHF monopole RF radiator and 4 associated ground plane elements. This aerial system was used to radiate a DTI approved UHF FM broadcast quality outside broadcast transmission channel, which could be received by an aerial on the roof of the station's premises at 55 Paradise Street. There was also technical provision to receive this transmission at some other locations in Merseyside, e.g. the receiving equipment co-sited with the Staunton TV transmitter relay tower situated on the Wirral, where a receiving aerial was bolted onto the lattice tower concerned. The received signal then being processed and transmitted down a fixed line BT PLC 15 kHz bandwidth sound circuit to the Paradise Street premises. A talkback facility was provided by a PMR system using a push-to-talk FISP microphone and associated monopole aerial. This PMR system was on a DTI-approved VHF allocation. DTI was an abbreviation for Department for Trade and Industry, and its RF and microwave wireless regulatory section was the forerunner of the Radio Communications Agency. The Radio Communications Agency was then superseded by Ofcom. The graphical representation of the spectrum of a VHF band 2 frequency modulated stereo broadcast transmission channel is shown in figure 9 below. In the graphical representation shown above, the frequency displayed in kilohertz is on the x-axis, whilst the signal level is represented on the y-axis. The maximum bandwidth that a VHF band 2 channel can occupy is 200 kilohertz. The rated system deviation, i.e. the maximum frequency deviation permitted, is 150 kilohertz for band 2 transmission systems. However, this deviation value wouldn't usually be realised, as the presenter stroke program and technical assistance would usually allow sufficient headroom in terms of restricting the modulating signal amplitude so as not to overmodulate their FM transmitters. Usually the modulating signal is in the form of speech and music. The pilot tone is necessary in order that a stereo audio signal can be demodulated by stereo receivers and tuners. It's positioned above the sum signal, that's left plus right, but below the left minus right difference signal, and is at a frequency of 19 kHz within the channel spectrum standard. See figure 10. Pilot tone's 19 kHz position in the VHF band 2 channel at issue. RDS subcarrier on 57 kHz within the channel concerned. A number of signal level limiter circuits were located at various points within the analog transmission chain to the medium wave transmitter side. However, it still wasn't advisable to send not too high an amplitude of signal into a BT-PLC sound circuit, that this would have led to a pumping and breathing effect, i.e. a form of distortion on the listener's radio sets. For the FM transmitter PCM digital lease line circuit, there are only limiting circuits within the studio complex, i.e. in the analog domain. At 57 kHz within the channel's 200 kHz maximum bandwidth lies the 2 kilobit per second radio data system subcarrier that's used by the broadcasters to convey some form of radio station's contracted name. For Radio Merseyside, this was BBC MRSY. The user of a suitably equipped FM stereo tuner or receiver can also display radio text, this being a linearly scrolled text system displaying the on-air radio program's details, e.g. the programme and presenter's name, etc. With suitably equipped receivers and tuners, there's usually an LCD or fluorescent alphanumeric display. Although the full radio text system hadn't been developed in the late 1980s, the character set used by a typical RDS VHF FM radio receiver in the epoch under discussion is shown in figure 11 below and is identical to that being used now. A list of the PTI, that's program type, text display names that were and still are displayed when pressing the PTY button of such tuners and receivers on VHF FM is shown in figure 12, also displayed below.
On VHF we're on 95.8. On medium wave we're on 1485. There's only one BBC Radio Merseyside.
Photo 28 shows Radio Merseyside's 95.8 MHz VHF band 2 stereo transmitter tower at Allerton Park within Calder-Sames Park in Liverpool. This site was also shared with Radio City's, that's ILR's, FM stereo site. The far image, photo 29, is of Radio Merseyside's 1485 kHz MF mast located in Wallasey, Wirral. This was switched off for Radio Merseyside in March 2020. Photo 30 shows the Staunton Television Relay Tower. This was opened in the late 1970s to relay the UHF television transmissions from its parent transmitter located at Winter Hill in Lancashire. The tower received Winter Hill's UHF signals using a log periodic aerial bolted to the side of the tower. At the same time, it also provided an aerial support structure for area constabulary VHF radio system aerials, now obsolete. These can be seen in the photograph as four folded dipoles in a spatial diversity arrangement near the top of the tower, located on its right-hand side as the photo is seen. In the late 70s, a UHF allocated wireless receiving insertion point was installed for BBC Radio car use Either point would send received signals down a post office telecommunications lease line to Radio Merseyside Studios, or indeed any other BBC radio studio. In the 2000s, the Staunton Tower mounted off Mount Road in Higher Bebington became the site of one of Radio Merseyside's VHF Band 3 DAB radio transmitters, in addition to an insertion point. From the early 1990s, and as the years went by, more and more aerials were added to the tower, evidence of the burgeoning information age. Right at the heart of the community. The BT plc Liverpool District advertisement, which appears within the Radio Merseyside 20th birthday issue magazine, is shown in figure 13. Published in the autumn of 1987, BT plc, or as their corporate identity described them in the 1980s, British Telecom, was and still is a major provider of various grades of telephony and broadcast sound and vision circuits to Radio Merseyside. Other BBC local radio stations, the BBC Radio and Television Services regionally and nationally, independent local radio and independent television. The hand-drawn visual images in this advert represented some of BT plc's activities of the day. The suited man wearing a hard hat depicts a telecommunications technical officer in a supervisory role and holding a telephone receiver that's connected to portable line testing and diagnostic equipment in order to communicate with one of the company's field technicians in the process of commissioning a new leased line point-to-point sound circuit, for instance. If for any reason Radio Merseyside listeners couldn't receive the station's VHF FM or medium wave transmissions, for example because they were for some reason out of range of its wireless transmissions, a listener could dial the number 202 on their BT fixed line PSTN connection when within the 051 STD area, or if outside the 051 STD area they could dial 051 246 8075. The PSTN lines originally used for the Sound of Merseyside service were shut down many years ago, and so far their associated numbers remain unallocated to any new PSTN subscriber line. The Liverpool area 051 STD code changed to 0151 in April 1995 in order to increase the number of possible subscriber line numbers that could be handled within the BT plc Liverpool district. A 1 was added after the trunk call indicator 0 in all BT districts. New broadcasting house, technical facility, television facilities. Edited video recording highlights were sometimes inserted into the 12:55 PM and or 9:25 PM regional news bulletins originating from Studio P, positioned just off the ground floor newsroom within New Broadcasting House. Shown in photo 22 is a presenter's eye version of Studio P, whilst in photo 23 is just more than what the viewer would have seen on their TV sets at home, i.e. the studio background and its surrounding wall, out of camera view to the viewer. A TV broadcaster could also use Studio P to interview a contributor, e.g. for insertion into Newsnight, again with BT plc network switching centre assistance. This programme originated from Television Centre in London. Photos 31 and 32 below show Northwest Tonight, transmitted on weekdays at 6:35 PM, originated from Studio B, known to staff as B Vision. Studio A was generally used for recorded network TV productions, for example Question of Sport. Photo 33, opt-out switch and associated switches for opting out of Television Centre's output as it was then. Buttons that could be assigned for remotely operating ENG cartridge players. Audio fader controls for one of the newscaster's microphones. Vision signal mixing panel. Stopwatch device for getting accurate timing so that they could opt back into the network on time. One of the newscasters or contributors' microphones, the other was a tie-clip microphone. Telephone intercom for contacting the CTA on the 3rd floor of New Broadcasting House or Network Switching Centre. An indication device that indicated what network, either Network 1 or Network 2, was being passed through the mixing desk. An audio patch panel. Presenter's camera view. Opt-out script, also known as opt-out instructions, appeared here. Another ENG cartridge tape preview monitor. Yet another ENG cartridge tape preview monitor. Newscasters stroke contributors TV camera with auto cue facility. Current network vision signal net 1 or net 2 from television centre. And another ENG cartridge tape preview monitor. A chair for a regional technical operator to sit at while supervising a contributor if the studio is being used for contribution. Audio level pots. Talkback microphones, e.g. to a distant outside broadcast site. A one-year wonder of one camera set up in the Bi-Media newsroom. For 1 year, the 5-minute approximately news bulletins originating within the Bi-Media newsroom, with the backdrop being part of the functioning newsroom, and at the back where the windows were vertical blinds with the words Northwest Update running along the top and bottom borders of the aforementioned blinds. See photo 35 featured next. In photo 34 you can see the one camera facility with TV camera and associated auto cue TV monitor, light diffusers with diffused light onto the newscaster, clock with red cue light and audio patch panel beneath the TV monitor. New Broadcasting House television news facilities continued. In photo 35, note the vertical blinds at the back of the newsroom, displaying the words Northwest Update. This was the view seen behind the newscaster stroke contributor when the TV camera featured in photo 34 was on air. The newscaster would sit at the desk with the computer terminal and telephone seen in the foreground of the image. Photo 36 shows a more general view of NBH's Bi-Media newsroom as it looked in December 1990. Photos 37 and 38 picture the Winter Hill UHF Band 5 television and VHF Band 2 radio terrestrial transmitter site as it looked in October 1988. One of the BBC Radio Lancashire's VHF FM transmitter sites is to this day located at Winter Hill. Its VHF band frequency is 103.9 MHz and its mixed polarisation transmission officially radiated at 2 kilowatts ERP. The Winter Hill UHF Band 5 TV transmitter coverage area is shown in Figure 15. The coverage area defined here differs from the news and current affairs editorial boundaries, which are a little different for political reasons. Compare the editorial boundaries featured near the beginning of this presentation. Because of the nature of UHF Band 5 wireless propagation, which is predominantly space wave in nature, and the effect on it caused by hills, large buildings and other structures and trees, the transmitter network planners had to implement a relay building program in cooperation with the IBA in order to fill in areas of the northwest which suffered from poor TV reception of Winter Hill's Band 5 transmissions. These relays received the off-air Band 5 transmission signal, processed it and then re-radiated it on other UHF Band 5 and 4 channels so as to avoid any mutual interference problems with their parent main station and any other nearby or distant relay transmitters. IBA is an abbreviation for Independent Broadcasting Authority. They own the Winter Hill site. The rear side of the Winter Hill main transmitter UHF Band 5 coverage map is shown in Figure 16 opposite. It displays a list of all the associated dependent relays that officially took an off-air signal feed from their parent high-power transmitter site, which was linked to New Broadcasting House via BT plc lease line connection to a microwave link which was installed on an aerial support gantry atop the Piccadilly Plaza building in central Manchester. There were other routes that the signals leaving New Broadcasting House could have taken, e.g. a BT plc lease line connection to Winter Hill directly. This lease line route was the original sound and vision Sega path that was used for the TV services routed through or originating from MBH when this broadcasting centre opened in the year 1975. The lease line route to Winter Hill was via BT plc's Manchester Network Switching Centre, as was the case for nearly all incoming and outgoing lease line sound and vision circuits passing through MPH's CTA, Central Technical Area. National Radio Facilities.
Britain's favourite Radio 1. Radio 2 from the BBC.
Number 5. National Radio Facilities. New Broadcasting House possessed extensive facilities for the live and recorded transmission of BBC National Radio programmes, in addition to producer and presenter-operated studios for BBC Radios 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. There was also the existence of Studio 7. Studio 7 was predominantly used for the recording of live classical performances such as the lunchtime concerts, which members of the public could come and watch. Shortly before New Broadcasting House originated a live national radio programme, one of the then 5 BBC radio networks, BT plc's relevant NSCs, would swing into action and route the relevant audio circuit down to Broadcasting House in London, where it would be input into a relevant national radio network's continuity desk for switching stroke fading up.
The transition from BBC North West into BBC North. In late 1990, BBC North West and BBC North East, together with BBC North, were merged under the banner of BBC North. The BBC North region initially just covered the Yorkshire and Humberside areas. From late 1990, BBC North's HQ was to be New Broadcasting House in Manchester, and so would oversee BBC administration in Leeds and Newcastle. As a result of this merger, the 10 BBC local radio stations were to carry the same programmes from about 7 p.m. in the evening, Monday to Sunday. This shared programming system was to be known as the BBC North Night Network and was officially a cost-cutting exercise. The BT plc's audio distribution circuits were already in place, although some of them could only convey monophonic signals, so depending on where you were listening to a network programme, you may only have been hearing the programme in mono. This wasn't the case when I tuned into Martin Kellner's programme on a Friday and Saturday evening from 10 p.m. via Radio Merseyside's VHF transmitter known as Allerton Park. Martin Kellner's played jingles could clearly be heard in stereophonic quality. Next, I've shown the local radio identities for the 10 BBC local radio stations at issue. Number 7, the BBC North Night Network.
The Night Network Late Show. The Night Network. Across the North from BBC North.
Oh yes, marvellous. Well, amazing.
BBC North was based at Manchester, Leeds and Newcastle. Local radio frequencies were for Radio Cleveland, Radio Leeds, Radio Newcastle, Radio Cumbria, Radio Lancashire, Radio Sheffield, BBC GMR, Radio Humberside, Radio Merseyside and Radio York. Night Network station identities close up.
Congratulations, you've chosen wisely.
BBC Night Network. BBC North.
This is The Wall of Fabulousness, brought to you by the BBC and starring the fabulous late Martin Kellner. It's the show that includes no 4-letter words except fish, grit, rope, seal, Sawyer, bean and telescope.
BBC North FM.
He's the king of Bunnyland, 'cause his eyes are shiny and Peter's helping someone every day.
It's the programme with the lowest budget of any show in British radio history. A recent audit by BBC accountants revealed that the single most expensive item in the programme's budget was a pepperoni pizza with extra anchovies.
BBC North.
Let's spin that Wheel of Fortune.
Yes, fans, let's spin that Wheel of Fortune and find out who's been booked to entertain us this evening as we are about to hit the wall of fabulousness. Tonight, Mrs. Merton, Edouard Lepaglier. Competitions, Dried Milk, Stuart Anthony John Barrett, Arthur Godfrey and his amazing exploding haddock, the Archbishop of Canterbury and his donkey Doris, and a small carton of cottage cheese named after Nigel Mansell.
Driving along with the network. Around the North, BBC North FM.
The following programme is protected by copyright and is the sole property of the BBC and Cheap Trash Productions Incorporated.
BBC North FM. The Night Network Radio Show. Across the North, BBC North FM.
May not be rebroadcast on any electronic media currently in use or any yet to be created, and that includes hospital radio stations.
Across the North, BBC North FM.
Oh, and one final warning, it's still not funny.
Number 8. Synopsis. BBC North started life as BBC North West with its own chain of 4 local radio stations, which from the late 80s had a shared programming system for evening programmes known as BBC Local Radio North West. BBC North West produced the regional news programme North West Tonight from New Broadcasting House and short TV news bulletins, and also a selection of BBC Radio's 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 programming from the network radio studios at New Broadcasting House, Oxford Road, Manchester, the programmes in question being routed down to Broadcasting House in London for national distribution. In late 1990, BBC North West merged with BBC North and BBC North East and was to be known as BBC North, with its headquarters at NBH in Manchester. BBC North West's 4 local radio stations then became part of the BBC North Night Network, comprising 10 local radio stations with programmes being shared Monday to Sunday from selected stations on the network. BT plc interconnected each of the local radio studios at issue with monophonic or stereophonic audio distribution and contribution circuits. Number 9. References. Number 1. Visit to Radio Merseyside's 18th birthday open day at their former studios located at 55 Paradise Street, Liverpool, L1 3BP, November 1985. Number 2. Visit to Radio Merseyside's 20th birthday open day at their 55 Paradise Street studios, November 1987. Number 3. Informal visit to BBC Radio Cumbria's former premises at Hilltop Heights in Carlisle, August 1988. Number 4. One-day BBC GMR presenters course at their former New Broadcasting House premises in December 1990. References continued. Number 5. Salford College of Technology student visit to New Broadcasting House, October 1991. Number 6. Royal Television Society visit to New Broadcasting House's new Central Technical Area, November 1994. BT plc 2-week work experience placement in the Liverpool district, April 1995. Number 10. About the author. Joseph P. Campbell is 53 years old as of May 2025. He's qualified with an HNC in Engineering, branch of Engineering Marine Navigational Systems. His engineering field involves the use of telecommunications and communication systems in general, as does broadcasting. Joseph is also qualified with an unconferred BSc in Electronic Engineering and Communications from Belford University. Joseph has visited BBC North premises on a number of occasions, mainly for the purposes of college student and Royal Television Society visits. He completed 2 unpaid training attachments with BBC Midlands and East. One of these attachments was in the Central Technical Area of their Pebble Mill premises, now demolished, whilst the other was at BBC Radio WM, also formerly based at Pebble Mill. He is a qualified radio amateur holding the Ofcom call sign Golf 7 Oscar Kilo Romeo, and is also a former member of the Radio Society of Great Britain. He resides in the I2TU 27 CQ Zone 14 area. His email address is g7okr@hotmail.co.uk. End of presentation on BBC North West studio and transmission facilities from 30 odd years ago. Copyright 2025, Joseph P. Campbell.